talking about it, I'll be talking about it. Dennis Prager here. Join me this morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, and finally, we got a hold of him. I've been...
It's been a long, 3-month search, right?
Well, I've been putting out the signal because I need an emergency evac out of here so I can go be taken to Nashville to live at the Thor compound.
Yes.
I mean, we can't get out of here, Brad. We need some help. You got the connects. Brad Thor, best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author. You know, the Scott Harvath spy novels. You've all read them. Yes. The new novel, Use of Force. Brad Thor, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Oh, I love you guys. It's always a great time being on the show and keeping in touch with what's happening back in Illinois. How's that tax increase feeling for you all?
It hurts. The sugar tax is now they're taxing water in the air we breathe now. It's really great.
I'm numb to it. We're numb. We're numb, Brad. Basically, this is life after people here. You just have a bunch of people that are dead from the neck up, walking around, bumping into one another. That's what it's like.
And remember, Soylent Green is people.
Yes, exactly.
I saw this coming. The next thing that's going to happen is people that don't live in downtown Chicago, that commute in to work downtown, are going to get a tax put on them.
Yeah, commuter tax.
Going to say, it's coming. And Rahm's going to say it's not fair that all these suburban people make their money in Chicago but don't spend it in Chicago. So he's going to bill it as a fairness thing, the same way they were trying to increase the property taxes for people who lived around the Bean, saying that it's because of the Bean and in the park and everything to give them a higher value.
Bean tax.
Well, and it's already been proposed from several quarters.
The commuter tax.
No, well, yeah, that, but financial transactions tax. Because, one of the things that we still are saddled with here in Chicago, Brad, is these pesky exchanges and the insurance and financial services companies around them. We want to get rid of all that, maybe export that to Nashville or somewhere else that would treat them more favorably. So there's some suggestions that we get rid of all those businesses, too.
Well, I'm sure the steak restaurants and Porsche dealerships and all that kind of stuff down here in Nashville would love to have them. They create a ton of money for the economy.
How are you enjoying Nashville as a Chicago transplant?
You know what? It's fantastic. There's no state income tax in Tennessee. The schools are fantastic. The property taxes are very, very low. They're running a surplus, and they've got a rainy day fund here. Republicans control the state legislature. And the only place you're really paying anything is sales tax, and I'm seeing about the same rate I saw when I lived downtown Chicago. So I'm putting a lot more money in my pocket. And I was just up in Chicago. I had to attend a memorial service in Hinsdale for a dear friend of the family. And I miss Friar Tuck's, and I miss the Lodge and Butch McGuire's and stuff like that. But I got to tell you, some woman gets attacked with a box cutter on the Green Line at Roosevelt, and I don't miss that crap. I don't miss the taxes and the violence, and we're living pretty well here in Tennessee, as much as I miss Chicago.
Yeah, fine. Good for
Show
you,
off.
Brad. Yeah,
Must be
thanks
nice.
a lot. Make us feel worse about ourselves.
What's this surplus? Rainy day fun. Okay.
All right. So now we're going to have to find something where we can be equally miserable. How about congressional Republicans? How would you assess their performance in the first 200 days of Trump?
Well, you know what? Listen, I'm not a Trump fan. I think rooting for Trump to fail, though, is like sitting, in the economy section of a flight headed for Hawaii, hoping that the pilot's going to crash the plane before he lands in Maui. So, listen. You cannot run the federal government like a family grocery store. I think Ivanka and Jared ought to be out of there. I think the leaks are largely coming from Democrats that are still in the White House and friends of Ivanka and Jared. I think without leadership, and we're not seeing leadership from the president, I think it's hard to blame congressional Republicans, although you do have the issue of they all were reelected based on we're going to repeal Obamacare and replace it. I mean, even in Illinois, I watched my premiums go up and up and up and up and up, and they haven't come down. So I think if people are still paying high prices for health care and employers aren't able to put people on full time because they've got the mandate, I don't think the economy is really going to get to a point where we all feel like it's moving along. I think Obamacare really does impede success in that sector.
And CNN is out this morning with a new presidential poll, approval ratings at an all-time low, but 7 in 10 people, 72% say his tweets send the wrong message to world leaders and they wish that he would just stop. Are you in that camp?
Oh, I've been in that camp from the beginning. You know, Trump is 71 years old. He's not going to change his personality. And if you go back and look at interviews with Larry King or the Today Show in the 80s, it's not the same guy. Trump in the 80s used polysyllabic words. He could string together cogent arguments. If you looked at the transcript of the call with the Mexican president or with the Prime Minister of Australia, you see him jumping around, not finishing sentences. There's something not completely locked in there. And the Twitter stuff is bad. And the fact that he can't stop, it shows a real compulsion there. And I don't think General John Kelly, as Chief of Staff, is going to be able to stop that. So I think if he did, he'd definitely see his numbers go up. But the tweets are a constant reminder that he's not in control of himself nor of his presidency.
On policy, national security policy, another disclosure made last week was Trump inveighing on Joint Chiefs of Staff General Joseph Dunford, the chairman of JCS, to replace John Nicholson, the commander of U.S. Armed Forces in Afghanistan, because we're, quote-unquote, losing the Afghan war 16 years in. What about that in terms of a suggestion that there needs to be a leadership change in Afghanistan and just our general posture towards what we are trying to accomplish in Afghanistan?
Well, so I've been to Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan in 2008. I went over there. And I will tell you, the Afghan people that I met were some of the most honorable and wonderful people you'd ever hope to meet. Really incredible folks. Ann Coulter's got a good line. And I don't quote Ann Coulter ever. But she said, you cannot hand democracy to people who have more goats than flush toilets. And when the Obama administration, and it was done in Iraq as well, when a country is allowed to build their national constitution on Sharia law, you are never going to get an advancement in that nation because Sharia law does not encourage freedom of expression in the individual. And you need that. You need equality, but you need the individual to be held above all else for a nation to be successful. And it's never going to happen in Afghanistan as long as Sharia law is supreme. So we are never going to fix that country. That country is ungovernable, and you cannot move it into the modern world until you replace Sharia law as the top thing that everybody needs to aspire to. And they're not going to do it. It's a disaster. It's a disaster, and it's never going to get better as long as Sharia law is the number one thing.
So do you think we should completely pull out of Afghanistan?
Well, that's the problem. If you do completely pull out, you're going to have a situation where it can be a training ground for Al-Qaeda, probably even more likely for ISIS. So there is not a good way to do it other than to try to reform the actual people. Listen, if you look around the world, Amy, if you could snap your fingers overnight and have radical Islam disappear, peace would basically befall the entire planet, at least 90% of it overnight. So radical Islam is the problem. So why we look in other places for the answer is beyond me. We need to put withering pressure on the Muslim world in general to reform itself and to turn its back on this. Every time there's an attack on a bridge in England or the Eiffel Tower in Paris, we ought to be wringing another huge concession out of the Saudis, even if there's not a direct line between the attack and the Saudis. Okay, guys, another drop of blood in the West got spilled. Now you got to let women vote. Now you got to let women drive. And just hammer the hell out of them because it's those authoritarian Muslim regimes that perpetuate this stuff even outside their own borders.
As a novelist and somebody who weighs in on political topics, as you're doing here, I wonder what your reaction is to the contretemps over at Google, the 10-page document talking about the echo chamber, the kind of the politically correct echo chamber that exists at Google that was penned by the software engineer who has now been fired for, whatever, the usual things you get fired for at a company beset by a PC, like advancing gender stereotypes or something like this. Your reaction to that whole matter, what was said and what was done by Google?
So it's 10 pages. This tells me this guy's got a pretty serious axe to grind who wrote the memo. I didn't read the memo, Dan, so that's number one. Number two, I do know that Google is under federal investigation for pay problems and all that kind of stuff between men and women. So this guy, 10 pages, axe to grind, and the fact that he launches this while Google is trying to protect itself from federal investigation into whether it's been treating women badly at its company, probably not the best time to launch it. So probably stupid on his part, but he's got an axe to grind. So I don't claim to be a company that promotes equality and freedom of speech if you're going to fire somebody who expresses an idea different than what you all believe inside. So all this social justice warrior BS at the college campuses and at Google, don't tell me you're all about free speech when you're not accepting of any ideas contrary to what is kind of the line laid down by the politically correct. So listen, I've never been a fan of Google's. When your logo is a T-Rex and the company slogan is "Don't be evil," there's a little disconnect there.
Yeah, and when you have Eric Eric Schmidt at your head and Al Gore on your board, those are bad indicators too.
Yeah, the signs are there. Nobody should be surprised.
But you use Google or do you use Bing?
No, I use DuckDuckGo, and I do a lot of stuff through the Tor service. They collect this information all the time. I'm not a tinfoil hat guy, but I don't like them using Google Docs in my children's school. The teachers tell me, but we get it for free. And I said, yeah, but they're building profiles on what kind of ice cream your kids like, what kind of shoes they look at Zappos, so that they can market to them. So I'm not a fan of Google. I think it's a group. They got sued in Europe because when they were doing the street drive cars, they were mapping the Wi-Fi routers in people's homes. So if the car drives by your house, Amy, somebody eventually could look up where you send your emails from and figure out where Amy Jacobson lives. And if you're okay with that, that's great. Me, I don't want people knowing where I live.
All right. He is Brad Thor from an undisclosed location, New York Times bestselling author. His new novel, the Scott Harvath series, Use of Force. Brad, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one.